Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to the last program of what has been, I think, an incredible, interesting festival. I don't know if some of you already have seen other things this weekend, but throughout this whole festival, I think there was one question as kind of a red line, which is also the title of tonight, towards a new wall. Will there be a new kind of dichotomy between the West and the East? Tonight we're going to dig deeper into that question. This festival is called 89 because most countries in the East gained independence then, but Ukraine, the country of tonight, actually gained independence in 91. So we're going to look back into 91 and see if, what were key events since 91 or maybe before 91 to understand the current crisis. In the Netherlands, the crisis in Ukraine is almost every night on the 8 o'clock news. And this is, of course, has mostly to do because of the MH17 crash. But I still have the feeling that I don't understand anything of what actually is going on. And I think I'm not the only one. And tonight we are very thrilled that we have 4 speakers from Ukraine that will help us to get a more broad understanding of what's going on, about the historical context and what is Ukraine cultural identity. What really struck me when the MH17 crash occurred, it was said that we became part of a war that we had nothing to do with. And I think as a Western European country, it's very interesting to ask ourselves once again, is this a war we have nothing to do with? And I would like to discuss this further with my guests tonight. This evening will consist of basically 2 parts, 2 panel discussions, and both will be introduced with 2 introductions, so we have a lot to do tonight. And the first panel discussion will basically look at the past and work to the present, and the second discussion will start at the present and look to the future. I don't present this program on my own. My name is Meerte Vreese, by the way. I'm a program director at the Bali, and I present this program together with my colleague Bahram Sadeghi. And before we start the program, I really want to thank the European Cultural Foundation and Stichting Democratie en Media for making this festival possible. Bahram, I give the floor to you.
Thank you. Dobry den. Мене звати Bahram. I'm just looking at. I try to speak any Ukraine, but are there, except our 4 guests, are there any people from Ukraine here? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Meerte, would you please take the mic? Yeah. Okay. I saw one finger over there, one hand over there. Was it?
I think here, yeah.
Yeah. What's your name and where are you from?
I'm from Kiev, from Ukraine. My name is Kateryna.
Yeah, and you live permanently in Holland?
Yes, since March this year, I'm living in the Netherlands. Okay,
I guess it's about study or love?
It's about love.
It's about love. Okay. Welcome in Holland. Welcome. By the way, what just Meerte mentioned about, that we don't know anything about what's happening in Ukraine. How is the situation when people know that you are from Ukraine? How do people react in general, Dutch people? Do they ask any questions tell me about the situation, about Russia, the invasion, or they just talk about Zwarte Piet and the rain?
No, they do ask. Everyone is really interested, and everyone wants to get an insight into what's really going on, and if whether the media that's broadcasted there, whether it's correct, and maybe there is another view on that. Good. But it's always very difficult to explain it in 1 or 2 sentences.
Okay. Okay, so that's why we have this evening. Thank you very much. Are there any Dutch people or not Ukrainian people who have visited Ukraine in the last, let's say, year or half a year? 1, 2? Oh, quite a lot. Yeah. Meerte, pick one.
Here.
Yeah. Okay. When? And why?
Last time, I think, was in July this year.
July, yeah. Before or after the crash?
It was just before.
Just before the crash. And why?
I work in a human rights organization, the Netherlands Helsinki Committee, and we have quite a lot of contacts with Ukrainian colleagues.
And
so
which places did you visit in Ukraine?
Kiev only. I only made it to Kiev.
So
it is also because it's a place where we meet with other organizations from former Soviet Union. It's the only place in Europe where you can go from west and east without visa.
I see. And if I ask, in the last at least half a year, people talk, at least in Dutch media, about maybe the Cold War. Maybe we got a new Cold War. What's your opinion about that?
Well, I usually say the same thing that was said yesterday by Mr. Schwarzenberg, that we don't have a Cold War, we have a hot war. And, sometimes I think that, I have to talk to colleagues indeed in terms of, there was a division in Europe and we spoke about east of Vienna and west of Vienna. And maybe we have to start talking now about east of Kiev and west of Kiev. But it's something that I cannot accept. I cannot sell it to, I cannot kind of emotionally transmit this idea to colleagues east of Kiev that there is this new division in Europe. Even though, I think it is, I think there's quite a lot of truth to this idea. And, there was one generation, it took the Ukrainians or the Ukrainian new generation, it's exactly 23 years after the fall, after the end of communism, 22 years. And maybe it will take another generation for, other people to stand up to authoritarianism and...
Thank you.
I don't know. But
would you please introduce our first guest?
Yes, to talk a little bit, to give us more historical context, actually. Our first speaker is Mykola Riabchuk. Mykola Riabchuk is a leading Ukrainian public intellectual, and he recently was elected as president of Ukrainian Center of the International Pen Club, as people may well know. And his research focuses on problems of civil society building in Ukraine and questions of national identity and nationalism. Mykola, please have the floor.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you very much for invitation, for your interest in a remote country close to nowhere from the view of many people. Actually, Ukraine is located in Europe, as you know, but mental maps are very different from geographic maps, and probably the most popular knowledge about geography comes from daily newspapers, and as you know, daily newspapers usually have a weather map on the last page, typically, and this weather map, which shows Europe, usually ends at the borders of European Union. So Finland and Greece are included, and thanks to them, Ukraine, western part of Ukraine also appears on this map. So, in fact, of course, it's in the very center of Europe, technically speaking, and the same distance from Ukraine to western borders of Europe and to eastern, distance is the same. If we consider eastern borders of Europe somewhere in the Ural Mountains. So much about Ukraine. Unfortunately, this, mental geography has very serious implications also for political perceptions. I happened to spend recently half a year in Vienna, and I put a question, the same question to all my Austrian acquaintances. The question was very simple. How far Ukraine is from Vienna? Is it closer than Switzerland or further? Everybody responded it's further. In fact, Ukraine is closer to Vienna, 100 kilometers closer than Switzerland. So this is another example. But again, I'd like to emphasize not this geographical nuances, but some, mental peculiarities, and they are very sad because Ukraine is not located on the mental maps. It still is excluded from discourses, from political processes, and even this, statement about war, about all these occurrences which are not much related to us here, to Western Europe, are also very sad consequences of this exclusion. Shortly after President Yanukovych was dismissed in the end of February, I happened to get a number of calls from different media outlets in Europe and elsewhere, and most questions resembled me as some, part of Russia Today programs. Typical question was, what was there in, what was happened in Kiev? Was it coup d'etat or revolution from your point of view? I was surprised that this question was put by journalists from Prague, from Czech Republic. So I responded very bluntly. I told, and what was there in Prague back in 1989? Was it coup d'etat or it was revolution? And of course it was revolution, she responded. And subtext was how could you compare, this bright, famous, great velvet revolution in Prague and God knows what in Kiev? But it was exactly the same. And I feel that our main problem is a failure to recognize that events in Ukraine are actually delayed part of the same process. What happened in Ukraine back in 2004 when Orange Revolution happened, and what is happening today, it's another attempt of Ukrainians to get rid of the remnants of Sovietism, of Soviet legacy, of Moscow colonialism, and so on and so on. It's exactly the same process. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, it was delayed. It's still, Ukraine, because of number of reasons, it still is struggling with all these problems. But, underlying reasons for this are exactly the same. What's the reasons? What is the ground of this process? Of course, it was attempt to modernize the society. What was the driving force of Polish 1989 Solidarity Revolution or Velvet Revolution or DDR peaceful revolution in 1989? It was the same. Of course, there were three pillars, three major parts of this movement. One of them was, and probably the most famous and most obvious, it was freedom fighting. It was about human rights, about liberties, about dignity. But also there was very important element, economic, prosperity, consumption. And of course there was a third element, it was decolonization. It was about liberation from Moscow dominance. So, these three different trends worked together. And of course they united very different political forces. Liberal Democrats, socialists, populists, nationalists, all of them worked together. All of them were there in Solidarity, in Velvet Revolution, in DDR, and so on. It was the same in Ukraine. Ukraine's problem, of course, was that society was much more Sovietized, much more destroyed by centuries of totalitarian and colonial rule. So in this regard, of course, Ukraine was different from Poland and from all these Central European countries. It was closer to Balkan states. And I strongly believe that without external help, without assistance from EU, from NATO, the Balkan states would have the same situation as Ukraine. The same situation as Belarus has, maybe the same situation as Russia. Because in terms of political culture, in terms of structure of societies, they are very similar. Balkan states were they were luckier than we were. But nonetheless, Ukraine had something which make society vibrant and still fighting and still struggling for a better future and for Westernization, which is actually equated to modernization in public consciousness. I would remind you that back in 1991, Ukraine had a referendum about independence. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Parliament declared independence, and this declaration had to be confirmed, approved by popular vote. in referendum. It was actually only one Soviet republic which carried out this referendum, besides Baltic republics, which reestablished their independence. And I would remind you that 90% voted for independence. So only a few percent, like 6%, voted against. Within the country of 50 million people, of course, it was a significant number, because 6% of, you can easily count, yeah? 6% of 50 million people, it's something like 100,000. So you can easily make some, if these people get, or some of them, if they get money and weapon and so on, of course they can be very powerful and serious force, especially if they are agitated properly. But nonetheless, 90% supported Ukrainian independence. But on the same day, Ukrainians had also presidential elections. And there were two major rivals, former communist boss, who eventually became president, and a couple of anti-communist, non-communist candidates. The main candidate was leader of opposition and former political prisoner, sort of Ukrainian Havel, or I don't know, Ukrainian Valensa, I don't know. And he got only 1/4 of votes. Communist boss won with 2/3 of votes. So this, this reflects how Ukrainian society was divided. This reflects the degree to which it was Sovietized and Russified and engaged in this, pan-Slavonic world. People supported independence, but at the same time they voted for independence, which had to be continuation of ancien regime, which they, only minority, 25%, 1/4 of society, voted for radical break with the Soviet past, with the communist past. Only 1/4 supported Ukraine developing as Poland did, as Czech Republic did, as Estonia or Latvia did. So this is what we inherited. But please notice that within a few decades, society gradually matured, society gradually developed. And Orange Revolution was the first call. Orange Revolution signaled this substantial change within society. Society grew up, became strong enough to challenge post-communist regime. Heavily corrupted, very arrogant and greedy and incompetent. The attempt failed. But nonetheless, agenda remains the same. Agenda of 1989 was back in 1991. It was in 2004 and still remained. So Euromaidan was predictable. Actually, it had to happen. Either in 2013 or 2015 or later, but it had to happen. Ukrainian society, at least substantial part of society, the most active part of society, is not satisfied with with this post-Soviet way of life. So I would say that regardless of whether Ukraine succeeds today or not, I hope it would succeed, but even if it fails, it's easy to predict new and new attempts. First of all, because there is a majority, now we can speak about majority, and opinion surveys and votes confirm this. Majority of society do not agree with this post-Soviet way of life. They clearly voted for European way of development, and this is very, very important thing. The last point I'd like to emphasize is some very important features which signal this maturing of Ukrainian society. I'm not quite satisfied because I know how many problems are there. But please note that during the war, we have in fact Russian-Ukrainian war today. During the war, Ukrainians elected both the president and parliament in very orderly way. For the first time, we had elections which were free and fair. We had free elections all the time, actually, but all of them were not fair. Now we had free and basically fair elections. It's very important. Even more important is that society voted in the situation of war, I would emphasize it. They voted for moderate centrist parties. They excluded radicals from both sides. For the first time in Ukraine history, Communist Party did not enter parliament. They did not pass threshold. And radical nationalists also did not enter parliament. They also failed to get 5% to pass into the parliament. This is remarkable. Second, very important occurrence, which also is largely underestimated, how smoothly Ukrainians managed to move politics from Maidan, from the street, into the parliament. Immediately after displacement of President Yanukovych, all this street protest basically ended, and political process was transferred to parliament. Parliament appeared to be the only legitimate body which took all the responsibility for the future of the country. And they immediately nominated interim president. They announced new elections, presidential elections, eventually parliamentary elections. So they did everything which was necessary to direct political process into legitimate and legal framework. It's really very, very, very important. It's not so easy. You know, during any revolution, it's a big problem to move politics from the street into the institutions and proper procedures. And finally, Ukrainians elected the president, which was elected within one round, and there was some popular consensus about the need to compromise. Incumbent president of Ukraine, Mr. Poroshenko, was elected, I would say, as a second best option. Everybody in Ukraine probably would have first best option, but all of them agreed that we don't have time, we don't have opportunity, we don't have proper situation to promote our first best option, and they agreed on the second best option. This is also very, very interesting situation of this public compromise. So, to end this short brief presentation, I would stress again that Ukrainian society is divided, but it's not split. And these last developments very clearly prove it. That we have very different people who are of different ethnicity, who speak different languages, but basically most of them support Ukrainian state, and they try to build civic nation, not ethnic, based on ethnicity or language or religion, but primarily on common rights and responsibilities.
Thank you.
Can you hear? Okay.
After each speech, Mirta and I will have one or two questions, and then we will invite the next speaker. Mykola, maybe I just missed something, but at a certain moment you said that your process, please, your process was delayed because the revolution in East Europe was in '89, and at your place was in '91. Could you please, very briefly, tell us why? What were the reasons of this delay? I just maybe missed that.
I believe that I try to explain this. Just because by that time, by 1991 or 1989, 1991, Ukrainian society was not ready yet. Ukrainian society was too heavily Sovietized in previous time, in previous decades. So, as I mentioned here...
And why was your situation, your country, more Sovietized than other Eastern European countries?
Of course, much more, because Ukraine...
of course, but why?
Well, because Eastern Europe, East European countries were occupied by the Soviets only after the Second World War. They were liberated and occupied. That's another paradox. Ukraine was taken by the Soviets in 1918, 1920. there was short-lived Ukrainian National Republic, which fell down to the Bolsheviks. Only small part of Ukraine, western part of Ukraine, escaped this fate and was also like Central Europe, like Eastern Europe, was occupied also only after Second World War. And today you can see very big difference between western part of Ukraine, which was Sovietized only after Second World War, and the rest of Ukraine, which was Sovietized for decades and Russified for centuries.
I see.
So it's historical legacy.
I see.
Yeah, I have one more question. Maybe we will continue later on, but is it also that you said that because of 91 independence, this was because, it wasn't because of a revolution, it was just because the Soviet Union collapsed and then there was a referendum. So did I understood you correctly that this whole spirit of revolution also was in delay and is now coming out in 2004 and 2014? Or was there also already a strong civil society and a atmosphere of revolution in 91 in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, it would be simplification to say that 1991 independence occurred only because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Ukraine largely contributed to this collapse. The very reluctance of Ukrainian government at the time to sign this Gorbachev's new agreement about Soviet Union largely provoked coup d'etat in Moscow and ultimately collapse of the Soviet Union. But, you know, in Ukraine, this national liberation movement was not as strong as in Latvia or Estonia or Lithuania. Yeah. So they had to compromise and they had to cooperate with pro-independence part of the ancien regime. So independent Ukraine emerged as a hybrid state where anti-communists had to cooperate with part of reformist communists. Yeah. And this hybridity, it lasted for decades. It's complicated Ukraine's development because, you know, all these hybrid regimes are very shaky, unstable, and difficult to reform.
Thank you. Clear.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Volodymyr Kulyk. He's head research fellow at the Institute of Political and Ethnic Studies, National Academy of Science of Ukraine. He has also taught at several universities abroad, and his research fields include the politics of language, memory, and identity in contemporary Ukraine, language ideologies, and media discourse. Volodymyr, would you please? Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Kulyk.
Kulyk. Oh, I said Kulyk. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Thank you.
It was not the worst version possible in a foreign mouth. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I will try to continue with what Mykola started articulating and arguing, namely the conspicuous absence and regrettable absence on Ukraine, or underrepresentation on Ukraine on the world or Western mental map. I will try to specify a bit why is this absence, in addition, of course, to late independence, and less than fortunate geographical location. But actually, yes, the distance from Europe proper, from what is traditionally understood as Europe, namely Western Europe, is not that big. That definitely does not justify that Ukraine is so far behind in mental geography. And of course, one of the reasons is the very inertia of mental images. Yeah, they change, they do change, but they change slowly. With independence, with economic relations, with sport achievements, with cultural representation comes these changes in mental map, realizations that this country does exist, that it does matter, that it is not that far, not that obscure, but it happens slowly. And of course, latecomers are disadvantaged greatly. Those with traditional statehood, with traditional presence in international relations. And then coming from statehood and wealth and military might emerges also cultural presence, perception of the existence of great literatures, great cultures, and other achievements, sports, of course, in today's societies. But that's only part of the story. Definitely, the same goes for many other countries. I would argue that another very important reason for this unfortunate absence of such a large and such a geographically close, not so far removed country is a strong opposition of one of the traditionally present countries on this mental map, namely Russia, to the recognition of Ukraine as a place, on a mental map, as an actor in international relations, to say simply as a real country. In two presentations yesterday, two very prominent and sophisticated and well-known and knowledgeable people said something which struck us, Kateryna and me, and I promised her to mention that in my presentation today if I do not forget, and I happen to remember that. There was a reference to perestroika in Russia. We looked at each other. Why perestroika in Russia? If not in the Soviet Union, yeah? If you mean that Jan Machacek and Karl Schwarzenberg both referred to perestroika in Russia, if they meant that perestroika originated from above rather than originated from below, then was it about Russia proper? Was it more about Bryansk and Syktyvkar than about Tallinn and Tbilisi? No. So either it originated perestroika in the Kremlin, from the elite level, from the top leadership, or it's perestroika in the USSR. Why perestroika in Russia? Because people in Eastern Europe, people in Prague, for God's sake, which was crushed by the Soviet tanks not so far ago, still tend to think that USSR is actually Russia. Yeah, it's not so much different. So of course, Milan Kundera wrote about that a lot. Of course, nobody would think of Bohemia, of Czech Republic as Russia. Yeah, of course not. Even though they were denied a status of an independent entity and the right to decide their fate, and the Soviet Union denied them that right, and the rest of the world agreed to that denial. Yeah, enabled that denial, but still, they were not Russia. The Balts were Russia. Yeah? They were thought as something different on that mental map. Ukraine was different. Ukraine was thought of as Russia all along. And we have to understand why is that and how is it changing? How is it still there, but how is it changing in front of our eyes right now? For the rest of the world, but also for Ukrainians themselves. And maybe Russia will follow. For the Russians, it is still problematic to understand that. So why Russia so stubbornly opposes and why the West is still ready to believe Russia rather than Ukraine, Russians rather than Ukrainians, that Ukraine is not a real country, is not that really independent. Ukraine is not that really different. I would say that, of course, there is this imperial mentality or great power mentality. What matters in international relations is not the number of Nobel Prize laureates, which is almost as negligible in Russia as in Ukraine, but not even the GDP, which might be not that bigger in Russia than in the Netherlands, and largely due to the oil and gas. But the territory, the number of military divisions, as Stalin used to say, and how many divisions does the Pope have, yeah? And rather, the number of nukes now. Yeah? This is remarkably outdated worldview, pre-globalization, pre-information era. Yeah, that's one important factor. But another important factor is the founding myth which Russia keeps and disseminates, and which is largely accepted by the outsiders, including by the West, largely by the West, and then with the Western complicity, I would say, disseminated to the rest of the world. What makes Russia a country, a nation, a great power is tradition, imperial, not just nukes and oil and gas, or even not only great literature, great sport achievements, but an ancient tradition which originates, remarkably, on the territory of contemporary Ukraine. That's why this territory is so dear to the Russians, to those Russians who want to keep that tradition and the notion of Russian ancient origin and special place in the world. The very name, Rus, was appropriated by the Muscovy and then become Russia, and then now Russians have no come saying Kievan Russia. Russian tradition. We Ukrainians, and that's how it became known in all Western languages. So we Ukrainians try to invent something like Rus, Russian, or something, but nobody believes us. We are believed to making it up. Of course, Russians are telling the truth. Yeah. So whoever tells this boldly, some would say audaciously, but first, what matters is to tell this story first, is taken as telling the truth. Whoever trying to retell the story is perceived as telling the lies. Yeah, so that's why Ukrainian claims to this tradition, to the Kievan tradition on the territory of contemporary Ukraine are not perceived as equally legitimate, equally true, equally valid, equally valuable as that what Russians are telling. And of course, this myth helps to persuade the outside world that Ukraine is not a real country, not fully independent from Russia, or that Russia at least has what they call legitimate interest in Ukraine. What is that? Legitimate interest. Do Netherlands have legitimate interest in Belgium because it's close and half of the country speaks the language? Does it ever occur to anybody in this country to say it? What would be the fate of that politician or prominent figure who would dare say it? You're laughing, yeah. You know the answer. So it's okay to say that in Russia. It's okay to say that in the Netherlands. It's okay to say in the U.S. That Russia has legitimate interest because it used to rule the country. So it has to be allowed to continue ruling the country. That's how it goes. So, unfortunately, that's what also works for Russians. A large majority of the Russians believe that. And even more unfortunate is the fact that a considerable share of Ukrainians do believe, or did believe until the war. And if anything, the war did this one good thing. The war stripped us of any illusion, most of us, not definitely all of us, but most of us of this illusion that we are that close to Russia. So some people believe that, of course, they are so close that we have to be together forever. But now, if they could do this to us, if they could start killing us for trying to decide how we are going to live, maybe they're not that close. And so I hope that now this is what was also discussed yesterday. Is there a Cold War? No, there is a hot war. And if there is the hot war, maybe this is a good time to reconsider these old truths, these imperial truths, these oriental truths. This looks like whoever came late and whoever lives in that unfortunate part of the world is not entitled to the real truths and to the real right to decide their own fate. Unfortunately, my last remark, I see Baram, my last remark, unfortunately, there is an internal division within Ukraine. This part of Ukraine, this is actually not the east of Ukraine as it's often referred to in the national news. It's a small part of southeastern Ukraine called the Donbass, and even not the whole of Donbass, but half of Donbass or 1/3 of Donbass. Unfortunately, that part of Ukraine is very slow and very reluctant to reconsider this Russian imperial truth. And maybe I would even say they are more ready to ally with Russia even at this time of war than with Ukraine. So maybe the answer to your question where the division lies, is it east of Vienna and west of Vienna, or east of Kyiv and west of Kyiv, we would definitely not like the idea of dividing Ukraine east of Kyiv and west of Kyiv. Maybe it's east of Kharkiv and west of Kharkiv, or east of city of, I don't know, Volnovakha, Mariupol, in this, as they call, liberated part of the Donbass. But definitely there is this division, there is this problem, and we have to think about that, and maybe this is not so well known in the West because of the so much division, so much emphasis on the division between Eastern Ukraine and Western Ukraine. So now what was believed to be Eastern Ukraine is now aligned with Western Ukraine, is opposing Russian aggression. But there is some small part which is still ambivalent, in which might not be want to be part of this Ukraine which fights Russia, which feels so close to Russia that even at the time of war, maybe wants to ally with Russia. But this is just very small part, and as Mykola reminded us yesterday, it's just 5% of Ukrainian territory where the war is waged. So it's by no means the whole of Ukraine, by no means half of Ukraine, by no means even a quarter of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. By the way, I saw you a lot of in the darkness, sitting there, nodding and smiling. So I just have a question for both of you. You know, do you feel that the 91 was important for understanding the current situation in Ukraine, or should we go far back to Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement? How far should we go back to in your history to understand the current situation? Well, it's a question for both of you, by the way.
Yeah. Personally, I wouldn't like to go too deep into history because it's very, very long story and very complicated. Personally, I believe that Ukrainian troubles begin from the late 17th, early 18th century, when this entire myth of continuity between Kiev and Moscow was established. Because until then, until 17th century, there was no idea of continuity. Moscow developed as an absolutely different civilization and different entity. They had very little in common, Moscow and Kiev. But at the turn of 17th century, this invented tradition was invented. And after that, of course, a lot of problems emerged, as Volodya mentioned here. But really, it's a very, very long story.
Yeah. Is it long?
Let me add to that.
Please.
I would argue that the most important part of the history to understand what is happening now is the Soviet history, is the Soviet past. Oh. Not just because it's the most recent past. It's a past which many people still remember, and which can be part of like personal, family history, not only taught history, school history, yeah? But also because the Soviet Union shaped the borders of Ukraine, the identity of Ukrainians. The Soviet Unions, we both are products of the Soviet system. We both were allowed to speak Ukrainian, to get education, partly in Ukrainian, to love and value Ukrainian. And then we were both kind of pressured, to, not really strongly, but considerably pressured to respect Russian as higher, more valuable, to perceive that our language in which we were raised and taught and taught to love it is not that valuable, is not that important. And that's a common story for Soviet dissidents, for a lot of Soviet intelligentsia. So first raised in that language, and then kind of in various ways pressured to give it up. And that was what led to resentment and to various form of protests. And that was kind of crystallized Ukrainian identity, which led to this post-Soviet nation building.
And this is why Volodya was expelled from university once, and I was expelled twice.
You beat me to that.
So it's in a way, you know, before we came here, you know, we had a dinner together, and you know, I understood that this language issue, you know, we should avoid that for this conversation. But at the same time, now you brought it up, so I don't know.
Maybe we should talk later a little bit more on the cultural identity and language that is going on right now. And now, because I was you say we have to look back into the Soviet past. And on the other hand, in your speech, I also sense that you said the Soviet past has been the excuse all the time to kind of legitimize Russian imperialism because this Soviet power is put on the same line as Russian power. So do you also maybe say we stop looking back at history, because that's our problem actually, that people are still looking at us like under former Soviet power?
First, you cannot prevent anybody from looking into the past. Especially contemporary societies are deeply, I would say, varyingly past-oriented society. Society conscious of its past and continually thinking of the past and trying to find some answers to the current questions in the past experiences, and also in the process, of course, constantly reshaping and remaking up, so to say, past experiences. But definitely, Ukrainians are now trying to get rid of the Soviet past, and also of all imperial past as shaping them in a determined way. So many people believe that since we used to be, we were for such a long time together with the Russians, we are doomed to be together. And it is still a very popular way of thinking. But right now, before our very eyes, this is changing. People try to look at it different, not just half empty or maybe half full. Yeah. So we were not just together for a long time, but we were fighting them for a long time. They were suppressing us for such a long time, and we were resisting that suppression. So the Maidan and then the Russian annexation of Crimea and then the Russian invasion in the Donbass encouraged many people to think of those pieces of our past which can be used for this thinking as we are different from Russia, we are opposed to Russia, we were suppressed by Russia but we are resisting Russia. So Ukrainian underground movement during the Second World War, Ukrainian independence struggle in the First World War, Ukrainian Cossack statehood, again rebellions against Russia, and so on. So past is always kind of usable in different ways, and it depends on who wants to believe what and under what condition and because of what reasons. But now there is a strong impetus to think of those parts which can be used to differentiate us from Russians.
Yeah. Yeah. But by the way, Mykola, let's look back one more time. Right after the fall of the Iron Curtain, do you remember what were the expectations at that time in Ukraine?
You mean after the fall of Iron Curtain, but before independence? Because there were 2 years between
these 2 years. Yeah.
Well, I would say that, during Perestroika, major expectations were probably about some softened version of communism. Socialism with human face, so to say. Yeah. But of course, increasingly, the expectations grew up and demands grew up. So probably by 1991, within this period between the fall of Berlin Wall and independence, I would say that increasingly a higher part of population dreamed about independence. So I would say this was like this.
What does that mean, dream of independence? Do you remember what your expectation?
Of course, we recognize that we live in totalitarian society, or at least very, very authoritarian society, one-party system. And, of course, we did not expect to gain independence immediately and very easily. So the way was, at the time, the way was seen as very gradual, acquiring greater and greater autonomy. As much autonomy as possible within the framework of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. You said earlier in your talk that the Baltic states had it easier Could you elaborate on that, why they had it easier than you?
You said they were lucky. What does it mean?
Of course, easier because they had independence, pre-war independence, which was they were occupied by the Soviets in 1940, and Western countries never recognized this occupation. So Baltic states had been on mental maps of the West all the time. They never disappeared completely. So it was much easier for them to re-establish independence, because even Soviet Union even Kremlin was much more ready to recognize independence of this small, tiny Baltic states than of Ukraine. Ukraine was a crucial part of the Soviet Union, and
you two have talked a lot about being forgotten on the mental map. Can you tell me more about what that does to people, like to civil society? Do you think it has made the Ukrainian civil society more stronger because they are forgotten, or has it made them sometimes more passive because, well, nobody even cares about us, so why should we?
Well, I feel it has a very ambivalent impact. Of course, some people become stronger. Some people are paralyzed and despaired because of this. It depends. So,
but it's sometimes it's something you emphasized both as something I think very important, that you were not on the map of the mental map.
That's important now when we were looking at how the West responds to the situation in Ukraine, to this war. I was shocked a couple of weeks ago when I found a link on Facebook to a discussion on a German television channel, one of these numerous public broadcasting channels of general lender, these federal states, about whether the German media are prejudiced against Russia. To ask Ukrainians...
Positively or negatively?
Positive
or negative?
There was a discussion whether so there is a sentiment among some parts of the general public, among some parts of the general audience, that the Western public media are prejudiced against Russia. So to us Ukrainians seems absurd. We still think that they are rather not prejudiced, but marginalizing the Ukrainian perspective. They are inviting more Russian experts than Ukrainian experts. They present more news from Russia than from Ukraine. Some still work, their correspondents are located in Moscow and just occasionally descend on Ukraine. When they come to Ukraine, they don't speak Ukrainian language. They only speak Russian, and so they are kind of biased because of that. They do not have access to something. But in Germany, there is a perception that they are prejudiced against Russia because they are now trying to say something different than they used to say. So they used to say that only Russia matters, and all of a sudden they are now starting to say that Ukraine somehow also matters. Maybe not so much as Russia, but still somehow, not only does Russia have legitimate interest in Ukraine and in the Donbass, but Ukrainians also have legitimate interest on their own territory. How come? And part of the public is infuriated and it believes that their political and elites are crazy, that their media elites are crazy. So that's something which tells us what happens if you have been excluded from this mental map for so long, if you were not perceived to be entitled to the same rights as other nations are entitled. So that's why we are reminded every day when we look at how this is perceived in the West, and how, of course, we understand that it's not about Ukraine. If it were only about Ukraine, nobody would care so much. We saw in 2008 how much the West cared about Georgia. Unfortunately, we too didn't care a lot, and we too didn't help our Georgians, fellow Soviet brothers, in a way they deserve. But now the West cares so much because it's not about Ukraine, but because it's about the international order, about the international security architecture, about the right of a player who believed it is strong enough to crush the order. So, and now the rest of the players are concerned about that. If we set a precedent, that will happen. What will happen next? So,
well, I think we'll talk later about if Europe cares enough, in your opinion, and if they're doing enough, in your opinion.
No, of course, to us, nothing is enough. We want more and more and more. The more we have, the more we want. Because it's about our very existence, yeah? Yes. About our very independence, about our very freedom. So nothing is enough as long as Russians are still in the Donbass and Crimea, yeah? Nothing is enough as long as they feel safe enough to send more troops and ignore the Western, so to say, deep concerns, or very deep concerns. Thank you very much. Yeah. So as long as it's only about concerns and mild sanctions and debates on German television where the Western media is prejudiced against Russia, of course, it's not nearly enough. But we understand that the West has to be concerned about itself first. The Western leaders have responsibility not to Ukrainian population, but to their own population. Of course, we are aware of that. And we are aware of that our own leaders do not do nearly as much as best Western leaders do. So we have no right to criticize, but please understand that for us, it's not enough. For Russians, it's definitely way too much.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next,
the next guest, let me see. Kateryna Botanova is an art critic, curator, and contemporary culture researcher. She has been director of CSM-Foundation Center for Contemporary Art Kiev in Ukraine since 2009, and she is the founder and chief editor of the online journal on contemporary culture, Corridor. Her work themes around social engagement and art and the role of art in society's transformative processes. Kateryna, would you please?
Thank you for such a long introduction. I hope I deserve it. And thank you, my dear colleagues, because you've done such a wonderful job presenting history, and your audience did such a wonderful job listening and learning the history of Ukraine, of conflict, that I don't have to go there, and I can talk about what's happening now, or what I think is happening now. And I would love to bring us a bit back to the topic of the discussion today, which is the wall, or the new wall. And there was the whole day yesterday talking about the wall and how it was to, dismantle the wall and how it felt. And I was looking at the very telling pictures, and this one is definitely much more telling than the previous ones. But if you notice, then on all the pictures, I'm actually trying to escape the light a little bit, you've seen the barricades, the wall that people were trying to build to protect themselves from, whatever was coming. And this very famous picture also of the burning tires and the wall of fire is also an image of the wall. Why I think there is a problem with the image of the wall in the current situation? Maybe because the image of the wall is so, it's such a bright picture. It's something solid, something high. We imagine Berlin Wall, and behind the image of Berlin Wall, we can imagine, how beautifully it is to dismantle it. And the whole picture, the visuality of dismantling the wall is also very telling. When we're talking about the possibility of the new wall, then for European Union, I guess it's one meaning. It's the meaning of, the Cold War meaning. Would we have a wall between the European Union and, whatever, Eastern Ukraine, Russia? But for us in Ukraine, there is another meaning. Say, there was, I'm not sure where you're following the story, maybe not. There was an idea of literally constructing very physical wall on the eastern border of Ukraine. But if we leave this wall as a symbol of power for a moment, I would say that it's much more maybe important, maybe, because it's much more dangerous to think and to talk not about the wall, but about the little small cracks, little bumps that we might encounter on the way, something that's very easily to overlook and to step over and continue walking, not even mentioning, not kind of paying attention what you just stepped over. And I would want to go back to something that happened almost a year ago, long before this picture happened, in December of 2013, before all the Molotov cocktails, before everything, but right after the first blood was shed after the student camp was taken away from the central square in the very beginning of Maidan. After that, 9 activists were detained and sentenced to 60 days in prison. And 300 people came to a general prosecutor's office in Kiev for silent protest, because by law it was forbidden to protest in front of general prosecutor's office at that time. What they did, not all of them, but most of them, they laid down in front of entrance to the general prosecutor's office, wrapped in national flags. So the people who would come for work, people working at general prosecutor's office, would have to step over the people laying down there, covered in flags, covered in snow because it was cold and snowing, every day because they were laying there for quite some time. Sometime later, summer this year, an Ukrainian artist, Maria Kulykivska, coming from Crimea, and now temporarily displaced, as we call these people who cannot live where they used to live, made a performance in Hermitage during Manifesta 10, this very disputed big biennial of contemporary art, which was happening in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and was boycotted by quite a large number of prominent figures in contemporary art. Maria was laying on the steps, and they're huge steps of so-called new headquarters. It's a new building that Hermitage just acquired. She was laying there on the steps, wrapped in Ukrainian flag. Well, this time people didn't have to step over her. I mean, you could go around, but there was another connotation, very obvious. During the summer, she was also referring to the bodies of soldiers and the bodies of people killed at Maidan, who were first laying down on the ground, wrapped in flags, before being taken away. Well, people didn't step over her in St. Petersburg, but most of them would stand, comment, spit, say that she's mentally ill, and finally call the police. She, in a way, repeated this performance, but differently, with a group of people in Paris a month and a half ago. On Champs-Élysées, I think it was 15 or 20 people were laying on the sidewalk, also wrapped in Ukrainian flags. It was exactly in the time when there was this huge, well, fuss, I would say, in France about selling Mistral, these fighter ships, to Russia. I guess people were not spitting on her there or even discussing, but what I know that this performance definitely did not get to the mainstream French media. For Ukraine, the flag has always been a symbol of protest and a symbol of opposition. Even after independence, the flag was used to say, you know, we're different, we're not what you think we are, we're not Russians, we're not Soviets. And since November, December last year, the flag has also started to be a symbol of protection. People would cover themselves in flags, in Ukrainian flags, you know, coming to the streets and coming to Maidan. And just a short reference back, if you remember, during Orange Revolution, of course, Ukrainian flags were used, but it was more of an Orange Revolution. The orange symbolic was all over, and we still remember it as Orange Revolution. There was not any such sign at Maidan, just the flags, and there was also the picture 2 slides ago, right, with a huge number of Ukrainian flags, and also European flags. Everyone had a little, well, actually it started with the little stripes that you would put on your clothes, on the bags, on the hats, with colors of Ukrainian flag, and then Ukrainian flag and EU flag. And the whole idea of the similar colors has always also been very important for Maidan. Then you would see the flags on cars, you would see the flags on buildings, on balconies, on window shops, everywhere. After Maidan won, let's call it like this, you would see police cars in the city of Kiev driving with the little flags, you know, from the windows. And that was a sign, actually, as it turned out later, very wisely designed and thought by the new Minister of Interior to show people that we're not against you anymore. We're part of you, we're with you, we're here to protect. In the summer, also interesting thing happened. All of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, the war started, right? The whole country started to be covered in the colors of blue and yellow. The bridges all over the country, the lamp poles, the fences in the cities, you know, the big building fences or the small fences like in Boulevard, you know, everything that you can imagine. It felt a bit as a pagan ritual of mapping the territory, of showing that this is ours. I had a friend traveling to Kharkiv, which is the eastern part of Ukraine, not the occupied one, but just the eastern part. It's a big city. And coming back and saying, I had a feeling that I'm in a Gogol story, because the whole city, and it's a very disputed city, you know, if you're talking about, you know, the identity and the political interests, because it was all covered in the blue and yellow. It is really a little bit a Gogol-like story. But we also have to remember that in Kiev, let's say the central, it's called Sum, the central big former department store that used to belong to the city, used to be a municipal property and was sold to one of the oligarchs, and he's turning it into yet another shopping mall in the city. We have tons of shopping mall. It's under reconstruction now, and it's completely covered in a huge Ukrainian flag. And the same with the building that you might have, it's not here now, yeah, but you might have seen in all the pictures as the old Unions building that was burning at the last days of Maidan, and now it's also kind of under reconstruction, but it's also very disputed who's going to do it and what money should go there. It's also covered in a huge banner in the national colors. 2 artists in Kiev did 2 little performances beginning of this fall. One of them repainted this little fence that went over the boulevard, just, you know, the metal one, not the high one. It's the part of it, it's the boulevard which used to start with the Lenin statue that was tripled over during Maidan. So as all the fences, as I said, it was first painted over in blue and yellow, and the artist painted it back into black as it used to be, getting it back to normal. And a few days later, another artist, she's an LGBT activist, painted the same fence into the rainbow colors. And I think it's very interesting, because I think we somehow, in this the fight and in the heat of the war, lost the moment when the solidarity and the feeling of unity turned into protection, and the protection as a sign of fear, and the fear, as it usually does, brings us, or kind of is turned to an exclusion. And in this fight and uniting against the enemy, we lost a bit this very precious feeling of solidarity where everyone was included at Maidan. And what we're having in the East now, I think, is quite a definite sign of the very big fail of the identity politics that we had in the country in recent 20 years. Because we stepped over, and I'm not trying to, you know, victimize, I don't know, the intellectuals or the politicians or whoever, but we did miss the crack where the discussions about the language, and it was me, I didn't want to talk about the language because it was so overused. Every Ukrainian elections, except the last ones, except these ones this year, the language card was on the table, and we had all this very strange maps of Ukraine showing who speaks which language, where is the cultural divide. This issue was used, the cultural or, you know, the civilizational divide was used instead of the social divide, the educational divide, the level of living divide, saying what is happening in the country. And it was not only used inside the country, but it was also quite actively supported from European politicians and from European intellectuals, maybe because with the national or nationalistic identity, it's easier to explain what's happening in this faraway country. Who knows what's happening there? But that's, at least it's kind of more understandable. Maybe it's time, as one Belarus intellectual said recently in a lecture in Kiev, it's a time to redefine nationalism, take the essentialist core out and put the social meaning inside. And especially now when the nationalism is so manipulated with the notion of the Russian world in Russia. And with this, maybe, we can overcome the split, because even the falling of Lenin, and it's a very powerful image, well, no one protested about falling of Lenin's statue in Vilnius or wherever in 90 or 91. But again, if you follow even Western media, the fact of tripping down Lenin in Kiev or tripping down Lenin in, let's say, Kharkiv, there was a huge fuss about the nationalists putting the statue down. But inside the country, this discussion is also there. What does it mean? Is it vandalizing or is it nationalism? What is happening with the Lenin statues and tripping? And what's the difference between 89, 91 and 2014? But maybe if, for those of you who've been here yesterday, Sławomir Sierakowski, well, leading Polish leftist intellectual, could have said yesterday that he's a Ukrainian nationalist, maybe we finally can do something and say that too, and finally change the meaning of that word. Thank you.
Before we invite our last speaker, we have only 1 or 2 questions for you. I read some of your articles on the internet, and in one of them you were talking about the function, the role of artists in a country in crisis, in war, invaded country. Could you please tell us something about that? How important or irrelevant it's because your country is invaded? What does an artist should do in such a situation?
Well, if you read my articles, then probably you know that I like asking questions more than giving answers. And I would put the question here, and maybe we can continue, all of us. Yeah. There was a very important discussion between 2 Ukrainian poets this spring in June. One poet, Serhiy Zhadan, whom you might know because he is well translated in German, and maybe this name rings a bell. He said in one of the conferences in Kiev that he believes that culture had failed at Maidan, because the moment Kalashnikov start talking, the guns start talking, the culture failed. You cannot do anything against the guns. And if Maidan started as a peaceful process with, a lot of music and pianos on the street, you've seen this image, and, the paintings and the collective dancing and all of this beautiful stuff, and it didn't stop the bloodshed. And the other poet, whom you definitely don't know, Ostap Slavinsky, wrote an answer back saying that, of course, if you see culture like this, it definitely failed. It would always fail, in front of a gun. But if you see culture as an air that allows you breathing when you think the air is out and you cannot breathe anymore, as something that creates an environment, a space where you can still be human in a situation when it's very hard to remain human, then it can never fail. So how about we put this dilemma on the table about what art and culture can do in times of crisis, and maybe continue later.
I have one more question about, as I started this program, that especially in the Western media, the whole conflict is kind of explained as a West versus East division. And then you said that, well, you shouldn't, because it's a very, very small part that despite Russian aggression still maybe wants to be part of Russian, and actually Russian aggression has unified us much more as one country. And you also said that like we unified much more, and we definitely should not put the language card. We should look at other differences, because there are things we haven't seen, because otherwise this very small part wouldn't want to be part of Russia. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the divisions that are there between West or East, or between this small section of Ukraine and the larger section? What are the big divisions that are now also play a role in the current conflict?
Well, I would say, if I may start, that the main division now is a fear that the biggest part of Ukrainian East, not only occupied territories, but the territories close to the occupied ones, are in a great fear. which comes from, the fear of aggression and the fear of the war, which comes from the lack of security, social security, financial security, and job security. And the more this fear will grow, and it's growing because the economical situation in part of a territory is very poor for obvious reasons, and also for the reasons because the Ukrainian economy is falling down and the budget is empty. And if there is a chance to, save money somewhere, then the money is saved on the social guarantees and pensions and wages to the people working in that part, which is economically clear and understandable if we think only in economical terms, but it's very, very wrong because it increases the fear and it increases the divide. And the bigger cities which used to, well, actually not only the bigger, the small ones also, that used to heavily depend on industrial production, having a plant, having the bigger enterprise, and the whole town would be working there. The enterprise they're stopped. The whole towns are doing nothing and having no idea what can happen because there is still no program of, well, it's not even revitalization yet, it's too early, but at least some help, some aid, letting people live and know that the future is somewhere there, plus education, plus healthcare. You can continue this list, and this is the huge divide, I would say.
But there are socioeconomic divides, so the fear of losing jobs or something. But why is this? Is this because you also put this in an East-West framework? Because you could also look to the EU for job opportunities. Why was it framed that the people that are in fear of losing their jobs, their financial securities, that they would automatically look to Russia?
Well, because the Russia says everything will be fine. We will give you money. You will have your pensions will be 5 times higher than you used to have. Everything will be fine. And if you don't want to know, if you don't want to ask how you do it, I'm sorry, your economy is also falling. And if you're, living on a couple bucks a month, then you're not asking. Then of course you believe and you say, yeah, please, I need the money to feed my family. Why not?
Yeah.
I would say, following what Kateryna just said, one of the biggest divides is between those who believe these Russian promises, this Russian media tales, this Russian propaganda, and those who do not. It happens that people within one family can be bitterly divided over whom to believe, and it's hard to decide because for some people it's kind of obvious. All pre-existing structures of knowledge, of perception, leads you to believe this side or that side. But for some people it's not that clear. What I noticed in my recent survey data is that a number of undecided responses greatly increased. People just don't know what to think of what's happening, especially in the center of Ukraine, the region which also helps a lot to Ukrainian cohesion, which serves as a social glue between definitely pro-Western East and West and pro-Russian East, until recently definitely pro-Russian. The center is undecided. On a lot of issues, more than a third of respondents say don't know. So that's something which happens, of course, in a time of change, but also in a time of trouble. On the one hand, you're no longer satisfied with the old Soviet or Russian truths, about the Ukrainian nationalists, about Russia, about the Soviet Union, about NATO, and so on. On the other hand, you're not ready yet to accept this new Western or Ukrainian nationalist or whatever you call it, truth. On the other hand, of course, there is a division within each region between the active part of the population which is ready to do something about this situation, to take their fate in their own hands, to organize some protests, to organize some volunteering work, to organize the help to the army, to organize pressure on the authorities to implement some reform. And people who are just sitting and becoming bitter and bitter and not ready to do anything. I mean, they're ready to go to work and do something in their workplace, of course, but nothing to change the way of established of how things are being done, and they are just criticizing everybody. They are not mistrusting everybody, and they are still not ready to organize to start doing something to change that.
Let's go to our last speaker. Oksana Forostyna. She's a journalist, a novelist, and she's the executive editor of the Ukrainian journal Krytyka. And as an investigative journalist, she covered national politics in the local Lviv daily Lvivska Gazeta, and her articles have been published broadly. And Oksana will mostly talk about Ukraine's future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thanks to my colleague, they did a big piece of job. Instead of me, I can only add some prospects. And thank you for the introduction. I can only add that I'm a part-time optimist. I think we are very lucky. If you ever train to pass a test on computer, you may know that at the end you have this window and the proposition. Will you take this test again? I think that's the chance we got. We got a chance to take the test of the 90s again. Because after Ukraine gained the independence, our job to de-Sovietize the country, and my colleagues already told about that, was not finished. And that's what we did mostly last winter, and that's what we are doing now, and that's we are now to finalize. We are now burying Soviet Union. Kateryna mentioned this moment when monument of Lenin had been put down in Kiev, and I remember this moment very good. I was on Maidan with my friends, with my colleagues, and somebody called one of them and told that that Lenin put down. That's wishful thinking, you know. And I felt physical relief. I cannot say that I just, shared a part of euphoria because I was, like a kilometer from the place. But just hearing that news was physical relief. And from that moment, as an optimist, I knew we would be fine. And later on, Lenin monuments fell down in other Ukrainian cities, and we also had a map on the internet. So somebody followed this almost every day. This toppled Lenin monuments, and that was also a correlation. That cities in which people get rid of Lenins were also free from separatists. I think it's not a mystic. I think it's nothing mysterious about that. I think that's actually the. That's actually the feature of the every given community, how that community is ready to de-Sovietize the city. I can also mention that we are in a very grim economic situation. And that's hot war, as we described. It's really hot war. It's partly a kind of blessing for us, because it creates a sense of urgency. It creates a sense of urgency and a motivation for very painful but unavoidable reforms. Again, we didn't do it properly in the 19th. As a person who maybe everybody knows that some people are afraid of dentists, and against common sense, they delay their visit to a dentist. But again, common sense tells us that the earlier you go, the less painful it is. And now it's time for us to get some of this pain. I mean this painful, very unpleasant, maybe social disturbing economic reforms, but we have to do it at least. And of course we need the support from Western countries. And I don't mean only financial support. I don't mean only resources. I'm also talking about interest. I'm also talking about attention. I'm also talking about knowledges. I would say that that's not Ukrainian crisis. That's also European crisis in terms of perceptions. And my colleagues already told a lot about that. And on this path to this finalizing, we would also use some support and reconsidering of the experience of the 90s in Eastern Europe. Our neighbors did their job very good. For example, Poland is this constant inspiration for me, and I know that many people are more or less skeptical about the price of these reforms, about the price of this success. But we in Ukraine also know the price of complacency and the price of avoiding pain. Sometimes this complacency may cost even more, and it can be even more painful. Yesterday, Karl Schwarzenberg said that this is not Cold War, this is hot war. And yes, this is hot war with Russia, but this is also hot war with Soviet Union. Yes, you can have a hot war with a ghost. I think this is what happens now. Sooner or later, you have to confront the ghost. Thank you.
Please, okay. Let me see. We still have about half an hour. Mirta and I, of course, we have a lot of questions, but from now on, we will have this conversation with our panel members. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We will, yes, and we will come to you. Yeah. But let's wait for Oksana.
Yeah, my first question is actually, and then I will come to you, sir, about the current. You are an optimist, Oksana, so you are hopeful, but somewhere in your story you already said this is also a crisis for Europe, or a hot war for Europe. Could you tell us more about it, and also what you think of the European attitudes till now and what you expect from them?
When I said that's a European crisis as well, I meant the perception of the threat. Actually, now we share threats. It's not only threats for Ukrainian territories, that's a threat for, also a threat for Europe as well. We are all in danger. You know, I hesitated. Should I mention that? And yesterday we just had discussions with my colleagues, and some of us thought that it's very pathetic to quote yourself, yeah? And actually, that's what I'm gonna do. That was like 23rd of January, actually after the first killings at Maidan. I wrote a letter on Facebook to my European and US friends, and I compared our situation with the flight 93. If you remember, during excuse me?
September 11.
Yeah, during September 11, one of the flights had been directed by terrorists, by Al Qaeda to Washington, to White House, or who knows. And the passengers of the flight somehow managed to overtake the terrorists. So this plane crashed somewhere in Pennsylvania in forest. And I wrote then, we are the passengers of hijacked plane, and we may crash, but if we do, you're the next. Because we were not fighting only for Ukraine, we were fighting also for Europe.
And do you think this message has landed in Europe? Do you think people are aware enough, are doing enough with the sanctions towards Russia?
I had... I felt guilty when I first read the news about MH17. Maybe, okay, I'm not a superstitious person, you know, but then I felt guilty for this, you know, for this metaphor, for this comparison.
But besides that, I saw the gentleman especially nodding when I said, are the sanctions, you know, doing enough? Is Europe doing enough? Why were you nodding?
I can recollect a very nice picture I happened to see in New York Times during commemoration of Western military invasion into opening of the Second Front in Breton and Normandy. And there was, you remember, there was Putin invited to these commemorations, celebrations, and there was very nice cartoon in New York Times where around the table Putin was sitting, of course, obviously, but also Obama and Hollande were there, and Obama was whispering to Hollande, maybe we would leave him without dessert. This is so much about sanctions.
As my friend Volodymyr said, we never have enough. Yeah, but seriously, I think that was very important. I think that Western sanctions really worked.
I happen to disagree with Mykola. I don't think it's just about leaving him without dessert. You know, of course, as I said, we want more, but that's us. We are in a different situation than you. You still have the problem to persuade your fellow citizens, fellow countrymen, that this is something that has to do with you. As you started saying, we found ourselves in a crisis or in a situation which has nothing to do with us. Of course, absolutely false. if it's a violation on the international order, it has to do with everybody.
But if I am advocate of the devil and I'm thinking in a purely Western European interest, thinking, well, maybe we have pushed Russia and Putin too much with the whole broadening of the European Union, with NATO. Maybe we should give them Ukraine, you know, there may be some Baltic states, and then, you know, tranquility is back.
Yeah, so if you are guilty, if you Westerners are guilty of something, then of that mentality, that Putin deserves something beyond the Russian borders, which something he and Russia are entitled to, and which they cannot be really deprived of, and which they are deprived of a lot of that, they have legitimate interest to protest and to push back. And maybe we are guilty because we push them too much. So that imperialist, that realpolitik thinking, that thinking that somebody is entitled to something beyond their borders, is the guilt you are now atoning. You're now thinking that if you teach them to believe that they are entitled to something beyond their borders, one day they come to your house and they kill 300 people of your fellow countrymen, and that's not enough. They might go further. And so at some point you have to understand that it is the crisis, it is the war that has to do with you, with everybody. And if you start with something, with sanctions, with changing your media coverage, with changing the way you tell your citizens about what's happening and why it matters and what we should do, about the price which is acceptable to you and legitimate to expect of everybody in your country. So that's something we all have to do. And of course, even in Ukraine, as Kateryna mentioned, people who live closer to the war terrain are different from those who live farther away. So somebody is expecting that maybe a new weapons Russian smuggle in one day fire as far as my home, yeah, and some people who are 1,000 kilometers away still believe that that's not going to happen. But I happen to be one which was one day called for by this recruiting station. All of a sudden, we had guests at home, and then there was a call on my door, and I was given this how you call it, poviska, yeah, so invitation or whatever, order to attend this polling station. So you never know where it stops. You never know what has to do with you. But this is something we have to accept from the very beginning. At least some of us has to realize that and then try to teach others that it has to do with all of us, and nobody is excluded. So this is a globalized world. Russians ships can find one day themselves near Brisbane, yeah, and Russian planes near Portugal. So nobody is excluded, nobody is free. We have all to contribute to preserving or actually remaking the world architecture into something which would be more fixed, more stable, more secure, and more responsible.
If I may have a note, because I mean, I understand the logic of my colleagues, but I want to also maybe play a bit against it, because the logic of something that Jan Mahachik said yesterday, and what actually made me very angry when he said that, you know, and one day, no, the danger of the situation that the Russian planes can fly over European territory. And I was very mad because, like, people are dying every day in Ukraine. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but you open the news, there are people dying every day. And you were talking about the danger of hypothetical planes flying over Europe. But then, well, maybe that's the only way to understand things. You know, the moment the planes start flying over your head, and then you get... But it's 2014 now. There's been the whole 20th century behind. And which is more important, because the wall and all the, you know, the history lesson behind it, it's quite obvious. I mean, it's not learned, and I think that's also on the table, but it's there. But also the history of Balkan War is there, when no Russian planes were flying over, you know, the Western Europe or, you know, Europe, but people were dying every day. And Europe, which was much closer, as Slavenka Drakulic said yesterday, did nothing about Bosnian War. NATO troops had to come in, and Americans had to come in. Maybe it's a wrong logic, saying, you know, this is my house, and before you bomb me, I don't care, because this is so far away. Maybe the whole, and I'm sorry for, you know, being maybe idealistic and maybe too, I don't know, heightened up in, we had very down-to-the-ground economic discussion today during the day with Thomas Sedlacek, who basically made a human being an economic animal and saying like, well, come on, we have our iPhones and lives are so beautiful. Maybe we're not economic animals. Maybe we're still humans, and the idea of Europe is not only about my house, which is bombed or not bombed, but the people are dying, and this is also an argument on the table, and this is important today.
Thank you. You had a question. Still? Yep.
Yes, still.
Okay.
First, I want to say I'm a Dutchman, but I have been living behind the Iron Curtain in the time of solidarity in Poland, so I know what kind of situation it is. And the beautiful thing you told about the flags in Poland, the Polish flag was the other symbol against the Soviets. And I have one question because I'm very interested in this. Poland is helping in another way than the other countries in Europe. Can you tell, I don't know who knows about it, what kind of help? I know they send material and they cross the border, and Karta is helping all the opposition groups, but I like to hear it from you, what you know about it.
Thank you very much.
So the role of Poland in the...
Actually, I mentioned Poland as a source of inspiration for me personally, you know, because I was trying to talk about our future. But answering your questions, the first thing is very simple. Polish flag was on Maidan on the first day of the demonstration, and then I think almost every day. And of course, we felt this support, and that was not only moral support. That was all kinds of support, including, for example, help with people injured on Maidan. They got some medical aid in Poland. So we are really very, very grateful.
Yeah. I believe no less important, or maybe the most important Polish help now is the pressure within the EU to go further. Poland has been kind of presenting itself as an advocate of Ukraine for years now, but never has been this advocacy more important than now, because some EU countries become too preoccupied with internal politics, with how we will explain to our lazy and ignorant and egotistic constituencies when we go to the next election. How can we explain to them why we should lose money, or maybe even jobs, God forbid, for the sake of a remote country where some people are dying, so what? Yeah, as if nobody were dying these days anywhere in the world. Yeah. So Poland keeps pressuring. Yes, this matters. Yes, this is not enough. Yes, we may not accept Russian pressure. Yes, we may not accept this egotistic logic of some countries, be it Greece or Italy or Czech Republic or Slovakia or whoever next. Yeah. So Poland is one of the few countries which have been very consistent through years, and especially through these crucial months. We were afraid when President Kaczynski was succeeded by Kaczynski party was succeeded by Tusk party, and actually Mykola was the one who happened to say to me this wonderful phrase: "We were afraid of Schröderization of Poland." Yeah, we saw what happened to Germany under Schröder, how they were too friendly with Russia at the expense of everybody else in Eastern Europe. So we were afraid, but that did not happen at all. Poland may become less nationalistic or less hysterical in a way, but no less supportive of Ukraine. So now, when Tusk was succeeded by Kovac, there were of course also some fears that maybe this lady will not be as supportive of Ukraine. But in Poland there is this dynamics. So it's not about one particular leader. All political class, all intellectual elites, all media elites are fully aware of why Ukraine matters and why Ukraine should be supported. And it is all the more remarkable precisely because Poles have some historical grievances against Ukrainians. against Ukrainian nationalists, and they go to the Maidan and see this black and red flag of Ukrainian insurgent army, which also was guilty of killing some, murdering actually some Poles. But Poles do not think only in terms of that particular episode of history. They are fully aware of why the world in which Ukraine would be part of Russia or a special friend of Russia is much more dangerous world to themselves and to the rest of Europe than the world in which Ukraine will be part of the European Union.
Thank you. Vragen? Ik hou vast.
Yeah, I'm Alexander. I'm a journalist. I drove to the Ukraine front a couple of months ago to make a delivery of goods, medicines, and etc. And there we had a talk with soldiers there who were fighting. And I just wanted to contribute a bit of what they were saying, because actually their standpoint is that if they stop fighting, there's no reason that the Russian armies will stop in Kharkov. There's no reason that they will stop in Kiev. And that there's no reason that they might even stop at Baltic State or White Russia, because it's an expansionist logic. So I was wondering if you think that is exaggerated, like if this is something that soldiers say because they are fighting, or is this a true danger? And I have just one small question to add to that. What they were also saying is that who is funding this war from the separatist side? This is a question they ask themselves. And they say they have the idea that Yanukovych is doing this from Donbass. Because Yanukovych is not dead. Yanukovych got away with 3 cars and his valuable stuff. Okay. So the insinuation is that he might be doing it, and I was also wondering what your stance is on this.
Yeah, thank you. Dear members.
Sure. Can I start? I believe that about the financing, of course, in the Donbass, considerable share of money came from Yanukovych or Yanukovych entourage. They were interested in destabilizing the situation because they believed, falsely, as we now understand, that the conflict could be only used to pressure the new central government in Kyiv to give them more leverage, more autonomy, more freedom to rule over that region as they wanted to, and they did not expect that at all. But of course, when Russian regular troops started moving in, of course, it's no longer about Yanukovych's money; it's about Russian budget money, I would say. Maybe some funding still comes from Yanukovych or from some Ukrainian oligarch, but basically I believe the Russian state, the Russian government is contributing financially significantly to all this expense. And with regard to where the Russian army can stop, it will stop where we will stop it. As long as the West is not ready to fight, really fight with us, for us, we have to stop them themselves. And the more or less consensual thinking about intellectual elite and political responsible part of political class in Ukraine is that Putin will stop whenever he will be made to believe that the price is too high. Where exactly that happens to be, opinions vary. How combative Ukrainian army turns out to be. This defeat in late August and early September of Ukrainian army against the first regular troops is taken as a sign that Ukrainian army might be weaker than we expected, that it might be good to fight the local outcasts, so, local separatists which are not regularly really trained, but it will be no match for regular Russian army. But there is also another opinion saying that Russians are not nearly as motivated as Ukrainians are, and actually there will be growing opposition within Russia to dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of deaths, and Russians will be stopped pretty soon. As soon as they meet first real resistance and first real blood and first real losses. So, of course, we don't know where it happens.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add that, of course, Yanukovych is a history now. even for his former supporters, he's a history. That's first, and second, he's too stupid to plan some military operations, I think.
So you don't believe that theory? Are you saying that?
Of course, this war was predictable, at least from 2008, after the Russian invasion in Georgia. That was very much predictable that we are the next. And
That's the first time I hear that, really.
No, there were a
but
lot
you all knew that.
There were a lot of publications on this, because there were, after occupation of Georgian territories, there was no international reaction. So it was clear green light for Putin to continue this practice. Absolutely.
But it was framed as a reaction to Maidan, but you say no.
Pardon?
It was framed as a reaction to Maidan and the overthrow of the government.
Well,
that was just a momentum.
He prepared this for years. It was just...
He expected to be able to control Ukraine with the help of Yanukovych. He completely subordinated, Putin completely subordinated Yanukovych towards the end of Yanukovych's rule. And Yanukovych's refusal to sign this association agreement was the last drop, because Yanukovych completely isolated himself on the European front, similarly to what Lukashenko did earlier. Yeah. So Yanukovych could not rely on any help, and the country was nearly bankrupt. And the only way where Yanukovych could get money was Russia, but the price of that was complete subordination. So Yanukovych was becoming a puppet. And Putin could get the whole of Ukraine without actually fighting any war and firing a single shot. Yeah, you know. So that what changed with that is something that changed with the Maidan's victory, unexpected victory over the Maidan, which neither Yanukovych nor Putin expected. Yeah. So when the Maidan won, Putin could not expect to be able to rule Ukraine, the whole of Ukraine, without fighting. So he started to fight. He started to grab pieces of Ukraine, being unable to immediately grab the whole of Ukraine.
And still, Oksana, you said, I'm happy we got a second chance.
I'm happy we had a second chance to reinvent Ukraine. As I said, we made too much compromises in the 90s with.
And could the cost be that you lose a part of Ukraine?
Excuse me?
Could the cost be that you will lose a part of Ukraine by reinventing Ukraine?
We already lost Crimea, so we already lost a part of Ukraine. I believe, as a part-time optimist, I believe that sooner or later Crimea will be back in Ukraine. So nobody knows how quickly that happens, but I believe we restore the territory.
We only have 6 minutes left before Mirta wrap up and collect some questions. I have one question for all of you. You know, tomorrow is another day in Holland. You know, this whole Zwarte Piet discussion will be finished. And so we will meet, you know, our friends, you know, some of them working in the media or civil society, maatschappelijk middenveld, or the politics, you know, that kind of stuff. I wonder how could I or we, tomorrow when we face them, we say, okay, we met 4 people from Ukraine, a country invaded. Right now, people are dying there. And they were pleased with the help of Poland, because how the attention, the exposure you get there. How can we and our friends help to get more attention for your cause?
Maybe wait with the answer, collect this question, and then do both.
This is a question for Mr. Riabchuk. You said the Maidan revolution started as a revolution for dignity, prosperity, and anti-colonialism. But then this revolution turned into a war. So my question is, are you not afraid that this war is going to dominate everything? Because, you now have an oligarch as a president. There is still a lot of corruption that has not been diminished. Economy is going very bad. Well, my opinion is that the war is dominating everything.
So you're a part-time pessimist.
People get radicalized by it, not only in the positive way, if you think about the frustration, about Ilowaisk, for instance, Maybe you can say something about that?
Should I start?
Yes.
I feel we have to distinguish two different things. Ukrainian political crisis was over in the end of February with ousting of Yanukovych. That's all. After that, we have Russian invasion, Russian occupation of territory, Russian-Ukrainian war. So we can call it also Ukraine crisis, but as my colleagues put it, it's also European crisis, it's global crisis of European international institutions and procedures and everything. Yes, war dominates all agendas in Ukraine today, that's true, and war complicates economic reforms and whatever. But again, it's war which was brought from outside. Ukrainians lived within 20 years it was not easy life and very complicated polity and politics, but nonetheless there was no violence in Ukraine. Orange Revolution was peaceful revolution, and today again there would have been no violence without external factor. Is there a way out? Yes, I think it's because the war is kind of a blessing in disguise. So it may kill us, but also may make us stronger. You know this. And I hope it would make us stronger. As to, Ilovaisk, of course, it was very, very significant, but I feel it was not so much failure of Ukrainians as just unexpected invasion of Russian troops. Because otherwise, probably by today, Ukrainian territory would have been cleaned up of these people who are called terrorists or separatists or whoever. Only Russian invasion rescued them from complete defeat at the end of August. As to oligarchic president, as I mentioned, we elected him as the second best option, and I don't worry much about his oligarchic origin because half of American presidents are also oligarchs. So it's not big deal. I'm against demonizing oligarchs because we have very different oligarchs. We have oligarchs who made their fortune from some real business, from production of something, and we have parasitic oligarchs who made money from air, from state budget, from trade in gas, murky trade in gas and oil, from fake tax returns, export tax returns, and so on. So there are oligarchs and oligarchs. It's not the main problem of Ukraine. But of course, corruption is a big challenge, and everything depends on whether government would be able to encounter it or not. It's another front of Ukraine. One is in Donbass, and the other one is in Kiev.
Well, yeah, I would like to finish with Baram's question. Like, you have spoken, I think, very powerfully to this audience about that, that it should be a very a spot on the map that we all know of and should care about. But what is it that we should we pressure our government, and then pressure our government to do what?
What are you expecting from us?
Yeah, what are you expecting from
Suppose
us?
you can ask anything.
Yeah.
Nothing is enough, he said.
Definitely further sanctions. A proper coverage of the Ukrainian situation in the media. Enlightening your own citizens as to the situation, why it matters. Alerting your situation to the lies distributed by the Russian media. And realizing that at stake is not the fate of Ukraine, but the stake of the world. Europe has, excluding some conflicts, more or less of regional scale, had the longest period of peace in its history. And until recently, everybody was happy to believe that it will continue. Now we know that unless we stop Russians' claim to change international order as it pleases, the European peace is in danger. So unless we want it, we have to do something about it. That's the answer to your question, what we should tell our friends about why this funny country matters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'll be short.
What?
I'll be short, if I may, even
yeah,
up to
no,
the
of course.
Yeah.
It's not about politics. It's not about money so much, maybe. But what I believe is very important, because I believe this is one very important thing that European Union and Europe in general did for Balkans. By supporting arts and culture continuously in very different ways, as European Union, as the countries, as foundations, the Balkans in general and each of the country in particular was brought back onto contemporary mental map of Europe. And now, even if you're not super knowledgeable about what's happening in the Balkans nowadays, but I'm sure you know at least one intellectual or an artist, because they're so much present in Europe, in books, in publishing, in exhibitions in major museums. This is important. This is something that brings the image of a contemporary country living today, not 10 years ago, not 100 years ago, into what is happening in Europe today. I do believe that Europe can do the same for Ukraine, to help communication, to help the artistic exchange, to help bring the cultural Ukraine to the mental map of Europe. And with this, the political vision and the political mental map, I think, can join.
Well, thank you, because you gave my ideal bridge to my closing remark that on December 18th we have the Freedom Lecture by your fellow countryman, Ukrainian writer Andrei Kurkov, a very famous novelist, and he will talk about freedom and maybe also about the crisis, but also about the role of culture and politics in Ukraine. And again, I want to thank you all for coming here, and I hope that the situation in Ukraine has become a little bit more clear to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. By the way, the pictures you saw were shot by Alexander Perlaka. That's the only one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.